Welcome to Rock Week again. It is 80s Day in Rock Week, and we're going to discuss a decade that was, well, basically, for lack of better terms, the decade that kind of was my wheelhouse when it came to the evolution of rock, as it were. Now, you had bands like Bon Jovi, Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, Def Leppard, Aerosmith, AC/DC, Journey, and we all know that's the huge karaoke favorite with "Don't Stop Believing." Kiss, Foreigner, Rolling Stones, still around. Basically Iron Maiden, Scorpions, U2, ZZ Top, Blondie, Skid Row, Pat Benatar. Um, Queen was still around. Twisted Sister, huge MTV band, and D. Snyder is still doing stuff out in the zeitgeist. Led Zeppelin's still around. Sabbath still around from the '60s. Pink Floyd from the '60s is still around. Rat, Duran Duran, a little bit of glam rock for you. REM, The Cars. Now REM kind of brought into us a new era that we'll talk about tomorrow with the '90s day. Um, Quiet Riot, The Clash, Dire Straits, yes, Warrant, and this became the decade from non-video rock to video killed the radio star, and this is basically went from you know less produced, less synthesized, computerized music to let's get on video MTV. Let's have some what they called glam rock or hair bands. That was Poison. That was your Bon Jovi ish, Guns N' Roses ish. Guns N' Roses kind of was a little different. We'll talk about it when we get to '90s when we got into the grunge era. That was the anti glam rock. Bands like Quiet Riot were strictly show bands, although there's some good music in there. Same thing with Rat, Poison. Look these things up. Your parents might have been around uh, throughout this time. Now, one guy I'll mention from Minneapolis, Minnesota, he has a name of a park. Basically, it's called Paisley Park. He spanned glam rock slash hip hop. Um, Eric Clapton was a legendary guitar player, probably the best stated of all time. And he said Prince was the best guitarist he has ever came across, and he was a self-taught guitarist. And I grew up in a rough part in a rough family, but if you have a chance, he's been in Super Bowls and things like that, and recently passed away. Um, on that stint. I mean, just an absolute musical genius. Other bands, REO Speedwagon, Styx, one of my favorite Australian bands, Men at Work, Outfield, another Australian band, Huey Lewis and the News, Hall and Oates still survived since 1967 and came back with some good MTV hits, videos. And then we finally, even though the Red Hot Chili Peppers were famous in the late '80s to '90s, they started early in the underground scene in LA in '83. You'd be surprised some of the legendary bands that took off in the '90s or even the '70s or the '80s pretty much were predated before people really knew about them. That's kind of how it started. Now the Cure and things like that, the Smiths, interesting guys. In excess, kind of a different type or spin on rock, as it were. And it was hard to tell what was actual rock versus synthesized, overproduced glam rock. And then we had this new. I don't know if it was new at the time because the Beatles kind of were this, but they assembled by themselves. You had this boy band era. Um, I'm not going to state my opinion on that. Uh, you had Boys to Men. Backstreet Boys, uh, that kind of deal. So as the light dawns on that, we're going to have some, music time to hear some of these in the back. And of course, these are instrumentals, not violating any copyrights of the actual song. Genesis was an interesting one. They went from Peter Gabriel as the frontman to Phil Collins in the 80s and became hugely popular when it came to the video rock. And it's defined, the interesting way it's defined is the 70s, a lot of bands were show concert bands, but then the bands that were became concert bands on TV, on videos or produced. ACDC is another example, although a lot of their videos were in concert. Kiss was another one, although they didn't have a lot of pop play on videos, but they were Kiss was known as mostly concert band, and they made some movies as well. Anyway, I'm getting long in the tooth, as it were, on 80s rock, and I know more about 80s rock and 90s rock than probably any other era because that's when I was mostly conscious on this planet. So, anyway, great. Keep rocking this week. I had a special discussion on the discussion on 2.3 for chemistry. Uh, please, office hours are today, and we'll see you soon, I hope. And take care. Rock on.